For 97 years, downtown St. Louis was home to a small but thriving Chinatown. Today, the area where it once stood is being honored with a street sign.
I don't think a lot of people know the story about Chinatown. I think if you say, hey, did you know there was a Chinatown in St. Louis? People say, oh yeah, it's off of Olive.
Michelle Lee is a KSDK news anchor and co-founder of the Very Asian Foundation. And while St. Louis does have an unofficial Chinatown on Olive Boulevard in University City, that's not what she's talking about.
I think that people are shocked to know that there was a Chinatown here for nearly a century and that we had Chinese migrants in St. Louis in the 1800s pre-Civil War.
Lee is one of many St. Louisans working to find ways to remember St. Louis's Chinatown. The main block stood between Market and Walnut and 7th and 8th Street and was demolished in the name of urban renewal in 1966. It was known in its early days as Hop Alley, which is now considered to be a derogatory term. The name is due to the area's distribution of opium before it was outlawed in 1909.
Hop makes a reference to drugs, the belief that it was hopped up. And the press was horrible back then, and they used it all the time. And so people just got used to using the term Hop Alley because there was opium. Plenty of opium dens down in this area.
That's Peter Tao, an architect and one of the founders of Tao and Lee Associates. But when it comes to St. Louis's Chinatown, he is known as the accidental historian. He says he became invested in local Chinese American history while researching his father's history in 2017. Today, he is the de facto expert on St. Louis's Chinatown. A man named Ala Lee was St. Louis's first Chinese immigrant. He came in 1857 from the West Coast.
Ala Lee actually opened up a tea house, and then things just, slowly built from there.
And more Chinese immigrants began to arrive in the 1870s.
The first wave might have been 150. It probably only grew to maybe 800, 900 total, during those years. You also have to put in the lens that by 1882 in the United States, that's when the Chinese Exclusion Act came about.
Tao says the Exclusion Act caused widespread distrust of Chinese immigrants.
There was a general target on any Chinese back from 1882 onward with the belief that they could be here illegally. This Chinatown that we had was constantly being raided by immigration services. That's kind of why it's existed. It was people kind of stayed together, looked out for each other, and eventually then it developed as a little community.
The Chinatown's most well-known businesses were laundries and restaurants.
Statistically, it's believed that Chinese laundries comprise 60% of the laundries in the city. There was merchants, tea shops, business organizations, and restaurants.
The restaurants in the area attracted Chinese Americans as well as white patrons. Author Ed Shu's father worked at the well-known restaurant, The Orient.
There was like 3 locations of the Orient restaurant in downtown. And I know, looking at some promotional advertising, that was like one of the go-to places, like people would go to the theater downtown and always stop there before or after.
And though the Chinatown wasn't huge, it was an important cultural center.
It was a place where you could go, you can feel a little safe, and be around whoever was the few of your kind.
92-year-old Don Ko, president of Dragon Trading Company, remembers it as a welcoming place when he was a new immigrant to the United States.
I think probably about 1951 or 52, then I go down, I get kind of familiar with the people. Then I go down, play mahjong sometime, and on the weekend.
An important part of the Chinese community in St. Louis was the Onleong Merchants Association, which began in the 1920s.
They were basically representing the businesses. They set up the rules for how businesses could get started, particularly laundries.
those days are like a protection. Like if you own a laundry in the St. Louis area, the other person, they're not supposed to be open within 700 feet. If you have a restaurant, you're not supposed to be open within at least 500 feet away. So this way, everybody will make a living.
Don Ko became a member of the On Leong in 1957 and later was one of its presidents. Ko even has some of the original banners that hung in the On Leong's offices, some of which he estimates to be over 100 years old.
If you have any problem, they could help you. They have a English translator.
Well, they help people with courts, or they help people when the police come in and then they have to, they're questioning, and so they might bring people in to help with interpretation. So ultimately, they became this kind of community representative. So with this organization over their various eras, then when you say who might be the community leaders, there was these kind of unofficial mayors of Chinatown. They were basically the presidents of the On Leong.
One unofficial mayor was a man named Joe Lin.
He ran a very famous Orient restaurant. He was a local businessman, and he ultimately became a president. And there's a whole series of them, and they all have different levels of involvement, sometimes good, sometimes bad. Many of them are actually buried here still in St. Louis.
The members of the On Leong weren't the only prominent community members, though. One was just a boy.
Yeah, Hopalong's a great story. He's a boy who, when you go to the Madison School, if you were Chinese, you were put in a special class to make sure you were kind of understanding the American ways, the education system, language, etc.
Once Henry finished the special class, he was allowed to play sports.
And he went on and joined the baseball group and became fascinated with it. And the wonderful story is that he became such a student of the game that he learned every pitch. He became a pretty good pitcher.
Even the Cardinals took notice of Henry Leong. Cardinals administrator Branch Rickey came to visit the school and brought the boys' team to a game at Sportsman's Park. Another famous community member is Annie Leong of the famous Asia Cafe restaurant.
She became very much the face of the restaurant and then also the spokesperson for just the Chinese community because she was very Americanized and she could kind of, she had no problem kind of speaking out and talking and explaining things to people. So she was great. It was great to have a woman being the advocate back at that time.
Annie Leong remained the face of Chinatown as the area was about to be demolished.
So they were down there to the very end. They were actually literally the last occupants before they had to relocate, when there was not much left of Chinatown. And yet you saw this young woman just still enjoying life. It was her home, even though her home was disappearing.
In 1966, St. Louis's Chinatown was demolished. The demolition was part of a much larger urban renewal plan, which razed many areas in St. Louis City, but mostly those of non-white and poor communities, such as the historically black Mill Creek Valley neighborhood.
Nothing much they could do because the city take over. You can't fight a city hall.
But honestly, I can't necessarily fault the 1960s. This was during urban renewal. This is when the nation was trying to revitalize itself and make it better, but it always comes at a cost, and it comes at a cost to communities of color and communities who might not speak out.
The area was razed to make way for the construction of Busch Stadium and its parking lots.
So the block, which was already deteriorating, so the block was demolished and remained a parking lot for almost 11 years. So it's kind of sad you lose an entire community because of that.
The community didn't disappear, though. Many moved to different areas of the city or St. Louis County. And St. Louis still has a thriving Chinese community today, as well as an unofficial Chinatown on Olive Boulevard. But But Peter Tao and others are determined to make sure the former Chinatown is remembered, and not just as restaurants and laundries, but as a place where notable people lived and found community. In 2017, Peter Tao began conversations with the Missouri History Museum about collecting more of St. Louis's Chinese American history. In 2021, the Missouri History Museum's Chinese Collecting Initiative began.
So the mission is simply to collect history, research history in photographs, oral histories, any kind of writings, artifacts.
Michelle Lee, Peter Tao, and others were also involved in getting the street sign to honor the lost Chinatown. In May of 2024, Alderwoman Kara Spencer, now the mayor, introduced a bill which was co-written by Lee and Tao that would rename part of South 8th Street On Leong Way, after the Merchants Association.
The On Leong was obviously a group that was representing more than just themselves. The other reason was that in the direct translation of On Leong, it actually means peaceful and benevolent. So we thought that was a very kind of more spiritual way of acknowledging the history of this lost Chinatown.
On June 7th, 2024, the bill passed. Lee's Very Asian Foundation also helped raise funds for the sign. On May 30th, 2025, the sign was put up on the corner of Market and 8th Street. An official celebration had to be postponed due to the May 16th tornado.
So we want people to kind of look at it and go, what is On Leong Way? And then hopefully one day we'll have a marker here that will have then maybe a QR code that then they can learn a little bit more.
And though the sign is done, Michelle Lee says their work isn't.
You know, I feel like we're never going to get it 100% because how come 100% of people feel 100% happy? There's just a lot of racial healing that our city needs. And I hope that I really do feel like there have been some wonderful solidarity moments throughout history in St. Louis with the Asian American community, with the Black community, with other communities. But there's still so much work to do.
For Living St. Louis, I'm Veronica Mohesky.